get someone. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Vida Ajamu, Managing Director of DEI Programs and Community Engagement here at the National Civil Rights Museum. The Catalyst for Change Distinguished Speaker Series features thought leaders and experts on issues of race, access to opportunities, social justice, and equity. Our goal is to enlighten individuals on the struggle, the historic struggle for civil and human rights, and to inspire personal action for social change. Today's topic is building Black wealth, past, present, and future, focusing on economic, some say economic, I like to say economic empowerment. So the conversation will challenge us to analyze the systematic economic disinvestment of Black people throughout history, its effect on the present-day wealth gap, and steps to take forward towards building a safe and prosperous economic future for the Black community. We are live streaming this event today, and we can watch it for replay on YouTube, on our museum's website, and on Vimeo. Please just take a moment to silence your phone. Now I will bring up the president of the National Civil Rights Museum, Dr. Russell Wigginton.
Thank you so much, Vida, and thank you all for being with us this evening. It is my honor to talk about this place at this very moment. When you think about the National Civil Rights Museum and you think about the establishment of this place in 1991 and the journey that this facility was on to get to a place where we could honor and preserve the legacy of Dr. King and be a place for a catalyst for positive social change. It has indeed been a journey. With the amazing staff, the commitment of this community, the hard work of attaining a Smithsonian affiliation and an international site of consciousness, we every day try to inspire people to understand this country and the plight of this country and the journey that this country has been on and continues to be on. And so when we connect that foundation to wonderful series like the Catalyst for Change, and we think about what is our role as the National Civil Rights Museum today, it's important for us to focus and to focus on things and in places where we can be distinctive. And we've identified 3 areas that we think we can make our biggest contribution to society. One is education, one is arts and culture, and the third is economic empowerment. When you think about education, we are first and foremost an educational institution. And when I think about the plight of our society today and what should be taught, who should be teaching it, etc., places like this are ever more important because we have an obligation to tell a comprehensive and complicated, and dare I say, sometimes uncomfortable story that every student, every citizen in this country should be obliged to experience and to learn about. And when you think about arts and culture and you think about the role that it plays in bringing people together across all the lines that we typically separate each other, there's nothing like great dance, a beautiful portrait or piece of art, or Marvin Gaye's song, you're going to tap your foot and your spirit's going to be moved and all your differences are going to be minimalized. And when you think about economic empowerment, it's important for people to know that Dr. King came to Memphis in 1968 very much an economic empowerment issue. It was about sanitation workers who were invisible. And he was on his way to the Poor People's Campaign, which was about dignity in labor and respect for all people. So you fast forward 55 years later, there's still conversations and work to be done in that area. And that's what we stand for, and that's why we're here. When you're doing this kind of work, it's really important that you have partners. And partners who step up with vigor, with enthusiasm, and with resources. All of that matters. We are so fortunate for this series to have a sponsor in Wells Fargo who've made a commitment to have critical conversations such as this and to be collaborative in their work and support panels like this and deep discussions so that we all can be better. Please join me in welcoming Celine Calamer, who is the Senior Vice President and Market Leader for the Mid-South for Wells Fargo. Celine, please join me.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us, and thank you for that nice introduction, Dr. Wigginton. I'm here with a couple of my colleagues that I want to introduce quickly. I'm here with Danielle Brooks, who is the branch manager of one of our Memphis locations, and Jide Agbaosi, did I get it right? That's correct. Thank you, who is the associate branch manager in Cordova. And I'm truly humbled, candidly, to be here. Dr. Wigginton referred to the fact that he has 3 priorities or mandates for this institution. Wells Fargo also has 3 priorities when it comes to building wealth. We feel that as a financial institution and as individual employees of that institution, we have a critical role and responsibility to play as well. And it's very specifically supporting the growth of Black-owned businesses, creating wealth, and financial education. And we do that in a number of ways. So for example, we support the National Civil Rights Museum with an annual gift, and we also supported the King Day celebration this year. We have been a supporter for 13 years of this museum.
It's okay to clap.
We support the National Urban League, United Negro College Fund, my personal favorite, Women of Color in STEM, just to name a few. The Our Money Matters program, which we created in conjunction with the HBCU Community Development Action Coalition. It equips 40,000 HBCU students with financial skills and career support services. And then most recently, Wells Fargo made a $50 million grant to the NAACP, which is the largest single contribution that that organization has ever received from a corporate sponsor. And you know, stuff like, not necessary. Stuff like that grabs the headlines, but Vida said something really important in her opening remarks. I think it is smaller, intimate conversations like this with the thought leaders and experts that we're going to hear from and have the opportunity to engage with this evening that can cause us to turn to each other and do exactly what you said, which is inspire personal action. So if you don't mind my sharing, that's what I look forward. I'm new to Memphis. I look forward to learning how I can find my place in contributing back to this community, and hopefully today is a good start, and you all can help me do that. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. It is now my honor to welcome the panel to the stage. I'm going to introduce this evening's moderator. Her name is Rashawn Austin, and she is the president and the CEO of The Works Incorporated, a 24-year-old community development corporation here in Memphis. The Works is a developer of single and multifamily properties in distressed neighborhoods. They operate a farmers market, mortgage loan fund, and have recently expanded their services to include food equity, health equity, and environmental equity. Ms. Austin tirelessly lifts up the voices of those underserved in Memphis neighborhoods by providing real solutions and advising key community leaders, both locally and nationally. She earned a master's degree in urban anthropology at the University of Memphis and her undergraduate degree at Middlebury College. She's the mother of one daughter, Layla, who is pursuing a career in the arts. I've happened to have a relationship with Rashawn and have both admired and watched her for years. And the word that always comes to mind about Rashawn is, well, there's a couple words: relentless and warrior. You know, I've heard, I have a 23-year-old son, and I've heard him say things like, "Do you go hard for your people?" I finally figured out what that meant. Rashawn Austin goes hard for her people. And when you have people like that in your community who are lifting up others, lifting up many people who need a little help in their lift up, it gives us our best chance for a better society and to reach our collective full potential. So thank you so much, Rashawn. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I was afraid of what words he was going to use. I am from North Memphis, so I can handle you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today in this place, 55 years after the assassination of King, in my hometown. And because I'm a developer of housing, I have to mention that this month, 55 years ago, Lyndon Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, which was very significant for the work that I do. It hadn't made a ton of changes, but we can get to that later. I want to start by introducing this panel, and I'm so honored to sit on the stage with such esteemed individuals with great backgrounds and lots of information they're going to share, so I'm not going to talk very long. Introduce them, and I'm going to read their bios. And I'm over 50. Dr. Charles McKinney, Jr. is the Neville Frierson Bryan Chair of Africana Studies and an Associate Professor of History at Rose College in Memphis. His areas of expertise are the Civil Rights, Black Power era, African American activism, and African American politics. He received a bachelor's degree in history from Morehouse College and completed his doctoral studies at Duke University. His first book was titled Greater Freedom, The Evolution of the Civil Rights Struggle in Wilson, North Carolina. His second project, co-edited, and I can't pronounce that, ARMG, is An Unseen Light, Black Struggles for Freedom in Memphis, Tennessee. He is currently working on two projects. The first, tentatively titled George Lee's World, Race, Power, and the Afterlife of Segregation. The second book, co-edited with Francois Hamlin, titled From Rights to Lives, The Evolution of the Black Freedom Struggle, will be published by Vanderbilt University Press in 2024. His writings have appeared in newspapers, information venues across the country, including the Memphis Commercial Appeal, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Black Perspectives, Vanity Fair, and MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism. Charles is the proud father of a daughter and two sons, and is married to Natalie McKinney. Welcome. Our next panelist is Ms. Joselle Booker. We had a nice conversation here a few minutes ago. She presently serves as the president and CEO of the MMBC Continuum and its sister organization, MMC TADP, the training arm of the operation which operates the Tennessee MBDA Business Center. As the leader of both entities, she supports the growth and development of minority and women-owned businesses through advocacy, business consulting, capacity building, public and private contact connections, and access to capital. She joined MMDC in 2017 after a 31-year career with Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Division, the nation's largest three-service public utility, where she worked in a number of areas, including supplier diversity and procurement. During her career there, she designed and managed an award-winning supplier diversity program. And upon her retirement, 20 years after the inception of the program, the utility would spend $500 million with minority, women, and locally owned small business spending. It ultimately became the model across West Tennessee. Ms. Booker has received a lot of honors. I wanted to point one out because it's a couple out. It's brand new. In 2023, she received an award from Pinnacle Bank, an HBCU Endowment Award. And she also received in 2023, she was recognized as one of Memphis Business Journal Power 100, and she most recently was recognized as one of Memphis's most powerful people. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in marketing from the Jackson State University, and in Jackson, Mississippi. The should have been the indication. And an executive MBA from the University of Memphis. She's a lifetime member of the alumni associations of both institutions. Committed to improving the human condition of others by lending time, talent, and resources to organizations with that shared mission, she's an active member of the Memphis, Tennessee chapter of the Links Incorporated, the Memphis chapter of the Jackson State University National Alumni Association, the Memphis Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, and the St. Monica Sodality at St. Augustine Catholic Church, where she also serves as a lector. She serves also on the board of directors of the Greater Memphis Chamber and Catholic Charities of West Tennessee. And our final panelist, Mr. Eric Stevenson. He's sought to effect change in his immediate world. He focuses both his professional engagement on making the future as he perceives it better for those to come after him. His work as a professional is centered around developing communities that have been historically underserved. This theme can be seen in his current role as Chief Data and Compliance Officer for the P3 Group, Inc., the nation's largest minority-owned public-private partnership developer. He's responsible for the compliance elements of all projects, of which are upwards of $650 million in projects across the country, including the Build Better Student Housing Initiative, focused on providing high-quality housing for HBCU campuses in an economically responsible way. In his prior role, he was directly responsible for ensuring the equitable compliance of minority inclusion for the Downtown Memphis Commission. He's also responsible for some revitalization efforts in downtown Memphis, to include bringing the 100-year-old Dentals to Main Street through his leadership of the Open on Main initiative. What he's most proud of regarding the Open on Main initiative is the opportunities it provided for minority and women-owned businesses. Eric is a leader in many ways. He served as a sergeant during Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he held key translator security and quick response force roles. And he's also a civic leader. He served as the Polmark president of Kappa Alpha Psi South Haven, Mississippi Alumni Chapter. And he also has served as the Shelby County Mayor's Young Professional Council Chair. Thank you for serving with me tonight. So I wanted to start, before I dive into questions for our panelists so we can hear their wise words. I'm into data and facts. I'm an anthropologist, and most people, I guess, don't think of us as scientists, but we are. We're social scientists, and we like facts. So often, in tonight's topic about Black wealth, I think people define wealth in different ways. And I said often what we mean by wealth or access to wealth seems to shift based on to whom we're speaking and about whom we are speaking. And so I wanted to set the stage by giving a definition of wealth. And I often talk about, when we talk about Black wealth, it maybe is comforting for some people, but we focus sometimes on the negative for Black, when we talk about Black wealth, on consumerism. Or we may talk about Black wealth in relationship to home ownership only. Or we may talk about Black wealth in relationship to income, educational attainment, and entrepreneurship. But I want to touch on all of those things tonight. So to set the stage, let's start with a definition. By definition, wealth is not how much we earn. Wealth is determined by taking the total market value of all physical and intangible assets owned, then subtracting all debts. And some will call that net worth. So basically, economic wealth, and I say economic because we can have wealth in a lot of ways, social and spiritual, but we're talking about economic wealth tonight. It's net worth. It's the value of our assets less liabilities. Now I want to start with some facts before I dive into the question. White Americans hold 84% of the total U.S. wealth, but make up only 60% of the population, while Black Americans hold 4% of the wealth and make up 13% of the population. And this is from the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis. The wealth gap has consistently increased since 2010. And I beg to differ, I think it's been increasing for decades. In 2016, the average Black household held $124,000 less wealth than the average white household, and that's from Brookings. This I'll add, while the assets of white households are equally split between real estate, equity, and mutual fund shares, pensions, and other assets, the assets of other racial groups are less diversified. Almost 2/3 of Black wealth is composed of real estate and pensions, with 50% coming from pension assets alone. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that means. The pension asset speaks to whom among us benefits from that, and it's probably an age factor there. 12% of properties in predominantly Black census tracts receive appraisal value lower than the original cost of constructing the home, and that's significant because I said we hold our wealth in real estate. White college graduates have 7 times more wealth than Black college graduates. A 2018 Brookings Institution study concluded that the devaluation of homes in majority Black neighborhoods has led to $156 billion in cumulative losses. That's about $48,000 per home. The panel study of income dynamics found that Black-owned businesses are less likely to remain open 4 years compared to white-owned businesses. And due to this disparity, Black owners are more likely to experience downward economic mobility. And finally, among private sector employees ages 18 to 64, more than 53% of Blacks do not have access to a workplace retirement plan. Americans who have access are 15 times more likely to save for retirement when they have a workplace plan. And so I'd like to end this section, this data, with a quote from King. When faced with a history of oppression and a present rife with inequity, we must look to the experts to design a strategy for the future. No, that's not the quote, I'm sorry. That's actually what was written here. I'll come back to my quote because I obviously did not put it here. And I'll start with Dr. McKinney. Let's talk about the past for a moment. So, and I'm just going to ask a simple question. At what cost did this nation prosper?
Simple yet complex, complicated. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for that context. So I'm going to answer that question by telling a quick story. The story begins in 1840. I'm the historian, after all. In 1840, David McKinney is celebrating his 20th birthday. David McKinney lives in Hardeman County, Tennessee. He's given a gift His gift is a 14-year-old boy named Jake. Jake is my great-great-great-grandfather. Hardeman County, 1840. So Jake is introduced, quote unquote, to the McKinney family in 1840. The McKinney family was very prosperous. Cotton, they're in dialogue and in an economic community with cotton farmers and producers and cotton shippers down in Mississippi. Mississippi in 1840, the highest per capita number of millionaires in the country. Not New York, not Virginia, Mississippi. So David was a part of that network. So in 1840, David McKinney, his family is in the process of accumulating more and more capital, accumulating more and more wealth. Jake McKinney was the wealth. Jake McKinney was the capital. Also in 1840, you've got a fairly large number of black free people living in the Deep South who are independent landowners. That number is going to contract. One of the things we see from the 1840s up until the middle of the 20th century is the expansion and contraction of these gaps, right? So those folks who are owning land in the 1840s when David is being introduced to Jake, there's a high number, right? Thousands of black landowners in the lower South. Those numbers are going to evaporate by 1870. And what we see taking their place is small business owners and farmers, folks, again, tied and connected to the land. So we start to see a transformation of the nature of black wealth. And that wealth, again, starts to come in the form of the possession of land. So I'm not going to be too long, but I just want to give us a sense of where we began, where we start, right? Free people of color who owned land in 1860, Lower South, landowners, 706. That's 1860. It's 4 million black people living in the United States South in 1860. Black college graduates in 1860, 44. Black college graduates in 1909, 1,613. So we can track, right, the evolution. We can track the history of David and Jake, right? David has wealth. That wealth will grow. That wealth will accumulate. That wealth will expand. Jake and his wife Penny, who meet on the McKinney plantation and live into the 1890s, right, are going to eke out an existence. They're going to buy land. They're going to purchase land. And they're going to pursue the American dream, in most instances, in spite of America. And that's really the theme of economic wealth, of economic expansion, and the opportunities of black folk. We slowly build in the shadow of slavery, in the midst of segregation, in the midst of dehumanization and dislocation and terror and threat. In spite of all of that, right, black folks are amassing land. They are building businesses. They are they're attending colleges like V. Jackson State University, like my beloved Morehouse College, my wife's Spelman College, 1881, 1867. That's the other thing that Jake and Penny see, is the development of historically black colleges and universities, right? So we start from very humble and meager beginnings. One of the things that we understand is the importance of, right, eradicating the structural barriers to equality, because it's those structural barriers that stop us from gaining wealth. If you're not allowed to own property, you can't own property. If you're being run off of your property, right? We've got cases, we got instances. The Associated Press did a report a few years ago where they stopped count, right? 30, 40, 50,000 acres stole, 70, 80, 90,000 acres of black land stole from black folk in the Lower South in the first half of the 20th century. The number is incalculable, right? The amount of land that has been taken from black folk, and still we rise. Right, and still we rise, and so that's just a snapshot, right, of where from whence we have come. And again, the emphasis here for me, right, is how important it is for us to realize and understand and to combat the structural barriers. Martin King understood this. Whitney Young, the president of the National Urban League, understood this. In 1966, Whitney Young said, "We need a Marshall Plan for Black America." We rebuilt Europe after World War II. We need to put as much money, if not more, into the reconstruction of black America. And this is one of the most conservative of the big four civil rights leaders, right? This is Whitney Young in 1966. 1966, Martin King, we need to pass the freedom budget, right? Billions of dollars in the infrastructure, but also in education and in housing, right? So that we can level the playing field, so that people can succeed not in spite of the nation, but can succeed because of the nation. So I think a lot about Jake and his line, right? And his wife Penny. I think a lot about their evolution and their history. I think a lot about that moment in 1840 and this moment in 2023, and that past has a lot to teach us.
Thank you, Dr. McKinney. And so we're still staying in the past, and Dr. McKinney, I'd like you to answer this also, but let's start with Ms. Booker and Eric, if you want to take a stab. But this next question, segregation intentionally segregated or disconnected the Black community from positive economic and social outcomes, thereby reserving the rights or the economic gains for whites. What impact, Ms. Booker, did and still does segregation have on the greater United States economy? And how do we continue to experience the effects of these policies today in 2023?
Well, thank you for that question. Happy to be here this evening. You know, as we look at that and we think about that, especially across this communities, and what you see is that communities lack investment. Communities started to starve and wither from lack of investment. And so what happens in that case is you have communities that have aging infrastructure. In some cases, even in Memphis today, you have areas that don't have broadband, they don't have internet. You have food deserts, which impact the health of people in these communities. And on top of that, you have the lack of traditional lending, which opens the door to predatory lending of people that are oppressed and don't have as much as others. And so we look at communities where they have been, in many cases, left abandoned. I think about in my former life in the utility company, and how when you have brownfields in communities where people move out and they move into other neighborhoods, but all of the wires and poles remain. You don't have as much investment, you have low property values, but everyone still has to continue to support that aging infrastructure that is not maintained and developed.
Eric, you want to take a stab? And I wanted to throw something in there. My development side, Eric knows me pretty well, that I'm known to carry around a redlining map and just in my purse. And or the urban renewal plan or the interstate map, and they are overlapping. The Memphis map, and Ms. Booker brought up something from her experience at the utility in this disinvestment. And so same question, but thinking about the way we built our space and how that's impacted the economy or Black wealth, or the creation of Black wealth in Memphis. And we could think it probably looks similar to other American cities.
Yeah, thank you for that, and it does. And also, I realized that Linda, wherever you are, I sent you the wrong bio, so my bad. And yeah, that's not your fault. But no, it's my fault completely. So sorry. So in the built environment specifically, we've seen so much, such a large amount of disinvestment, just steeped in are not going back, like Joselle mentioned, not going back and reinvesting in those properties, not going back and recognizing that we need to invest in the space, and we need to take time to understand that when we're in these, what is happening in these spaces is people are oftentimes engaged in these spaces. They are living in these spaces, they are investing. And when they invest in these spaces, and then they're removed, as you're talking about the redlining map or the highways that are run through these neighborhoods, they don't have the opportunity to grow and build and develop and reap the benefits year over year from said growth of the assets. And that's what we have to think about them as assets. I think what Joselle was referring to was, the assets that the utility companies put in that have costs associated with them. When you pull all that out, or you don't invest in it, or you don't recognize that the people there are deserving of this investment, it deteriorates and crumbles over time. I'm trying to grapple with the book that you introduced me to is The Color of Law. I know you've introduced me to several books. Color of Law, The Color of Money, the two that stand out. But the impact of how those maps overlap and how that disinvestment over time continues to erode, and we don't put anything back into it, really creates an exacerbated picture over the years. But I think that I'm trying to make sure I'm answering and pointing to the question that you're referring to. Yeah. Okay. No, that's what happened.
And Dr. McKinney, I cannot leave you out when we're talking about segregation policies and the historical implications, but bring it forward to today.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that segregation is policy, right? And it's also profitable policy for the segregators, right? Not the segregated, right? Ta-Nehisi Coates makes this great point in his article, The Case for Reparations, where he sort of casually tosses off, what do we call it when you tax property owners? You take money from them on a yearly basis for institutions that they don't have access to. You live in the state of Tennessee, and you're paying taxes in 1920, 30, 40, 50, and 60. But you can't go to the University of Tennessee, right? There's a word for that. That word is theft, right? My good friend, Wendy Thomas, who's sitting right over here, talks a lot about that in MLK 50, right? Talks a lot about, let's dig into, right, what the function of segregation, right? The function of segregation, and in addition to, right, in addition to the apartheid, right, of removing people from particular sorts of spaces, it's also extractive, right? It's also designed to extract resources from poor and marginalized communities. When you went into the Mississippi Delta in the 1950s and 1960s, and you went into some of the most poor and hard-scrabble counties, the black residents of those counties who could see the earth in between the slats on their floors had higher energy bills than the white folks on the other side of town. Why? Because we can. Why? Because we can extract these resources from these people. This is a function of power. This is a function of extraction. This isn't whoops, right? This is calculated. So one of the challenges that we have in the moment, right, is to confront segregation for what it is. Segregation is public policy, right? Segregation is a function of people making choices about where to invest or not invest, about where to place freeways, right? Ask Binghamton how that's working out for them, right? With Sam Cooper splitting them in half. We tell the story about, we tell a heroic story about, Memphians going to the Supreme Court to stop that highway from going through Overton Park, right? Yay! But we kind of forgot the part about the highway going through the black neighborhood,
Right.
Cutting it in half, right? So how's business development going in Binghamton when there's a freeway through it?
Yeah, that's an interesting dialogue. Yeah, the conversation about the Supreme Court decision from 51 years ago now, who those people were that went. They were white ladies in white sneakers, they were proud to say. And so that's an interesting dialogue. But I'm going to jump a little bit into the present, Eric.
Okay.
And we're going to jump back into the past, and not limiting you to the past, Dr. McKinney, as a historian. But the EPI reports that black women have always had the highest level of labor market participation regardless of age, marital status, or presence of children in the home. How do we contextualize this fact in this conversation about building wealth? And I wanted to add something. There's a common misconception that the labor market is dictated by talent and skill and not by race and gender.
Well, we know that it is dictated by race and gender. One of the things in the role I operate in now is at the chamber is to make sure that there's a level of fairness that occurs as we are entering, as companies are entering the market. It does our economy a complete disjustice or a disservice when we disenfranchise women. When you think about specifically here in Memphis, population is 52% female. And so when you have women that are in the community working and they're earning 80% of what men earn, you're undercutting the economy. When you have Black Americans in the space and they make 70% overall, you're undercutting the current economy. And so we continue to do that. We are, like Dr. McKinney said, they're doing it because we can, but we're undercutting our possibility and our potential. Right now, I know the numbers in Memphis. The numbers are the median income for a white household in Memphis is $76,000. The median income for the median income for a white household is $76,000. Median income for a Black household is $41,000. That's a 45% gap between the two. And I see people shaking their head like, how can we conscionably live with that in business? And it is only exacerbated for women. So again, if you think about that, if the woman householder is going to make 80% of what typically that Black male householder is going to make. So what do those numbers look like? So when we start to think about what companies are coming in and what are we doing, we have to start to ask the question of, is the pay and is it equitable and is it fair across the board? And we have to hold companies and institutions and people accountable for these things because, it is only doing this economy, whether it's here locally or nationally, because these are not just local challenges. This is a national issue. We see these same data patterns across the country over and over again. And so we continue to do this. We're only shooting our economy in the foot. There's a point in the conversation, I guess, as we evolve, but I'll get through all the data that we know in the market, but we leave so much money on the table by simply not being fair, equitable, and participating in racist activities. We leave so much money on the table.
Yeah, so Eric is talking about the money we leave on the table. Ms. Booker, what are businesses and institutions missing when it comes to sourcing, and this is right up your alley, hiring, retaining, and advancing Black talent? How do firms improve their talent management strategies using a racial equity framework? And this is funny because we had a pretty lengthy conversation prior to the panel about just this subject.
Today, a lot of companies use DE&I strategies, DEI strategies. A lot of private corporations have ESG plans. And for those of you that are familiar with that, the E is environmental, S is social, and G is governance. And so for many of those institutions, or all of them, the social part of it is where HR, hiring, retaining talent, how people contribute and look at how they support communities. And so through their corporate and strategic priorities, they identify and they say from a corporate perspective, this is going to be our approach as to how we retain talent, how we hire talent, how we look at female employees, those that have families. How do we treat our employees and our customers? And so they use their ESG programs or their DEI strategies. And so the conversation that we had about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that diversity has always been among us. Even in the 1800s, it was diversity. So diversity has always been there. And then you look at the equity piece, and whether it is in hiring, whether it's in looking at businesses, in how we look at our communities, and then you have inclusion. And so the work that we do every day at my organization, we see that as looking at trying to address the inequities, because that is where everything resides. And how we move forward is in how we look at the inequities and address them. And then we have the inclusion piece. So we've always had diversity, but it's in equity. So whether it's in lending, whether it's in housing, whether it's in a company's ability to be able to sit down at the table across from a corporate partner or another business owner and be able to deliver. Everyone doesn't start at the same place. All businesses are not equal. And so these diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are how a lot of companies are trying to hold, or the corporate leaders and the boards are trying to hold the company accountable for it. But it's really what they do and how we look at the inequities that exist and how people are addressing them. And it's those inequities that have caused us to be where we are today. Listening to Dr. McKinney all the way back to the 1800s and where we are today, is the access and the inequities. In this space where we work, and you think about, we're talking from the past to the present, here in Memphis, over 99% of the companies, 99 point some percentage of the Black businesses in this city are first-generation business owners. So they don't have the experience of the second generation and the first generation by being a third or fourth generation business. They're learning as they go. They don't have the relationships with bankers, with investors that generate companies that are fourth and fifth generation companies have. They don't have the benefit of the relationships that they built, the lessons that they learned, the wealth that they've amassed, or the profits that they have. So when you think about businesses today and you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, for many of them, they are trying to identify what those issues are, and we're trying to help them try to at least develop to a point of where they can operate equitably in this community with each other.
Yeah, so that, Dr. McKinney?
So anytime I hear the DEI talked about, I always like to apply to an equation to make it a bit easier. I'm kind of a data guy and I like numbers. My wife knows I look at numbers all day long. So think about the diversity piece as, say if you take Memphis, for example, D plus E plus I equals B, the B being belonging. The D, like Ms. Booker referenced, is we've got it in spades. We've got a lot of diversity that comes in. So if you give it an arbitrary number of 2, and the belonging is plus or minus or equal to 6 at the end, right? The D is about 2. The E, we'll give that like a 0.3. And the I, we give that about a 0.5, that inclusion piece of it. So you have an unequal equation once you get to the B. If we're trying to get to 6, if we got 2.3 and 0.5, we don't get anywhere. We're not even halfway to the 6. So we've got a long way to go for that belonging, and that belonging is really where the value starts to be extracted. When people feel like they belong in a space, when they belong to the land, they belong in where they are, then they start to perform in a way that we haven't even started to tap into yet. So the DEI component is really important, not just because it's in my title, but it's because it's really, really an important way for us to understand the belonging and the power of unlocking belonging in spaces where we can really, really start to scratch the surface of our potential.
Dr. McKinney, did you want to add?
Yeah, just really quickly, I like that. That's. I wish you were my math teacher when I was in high school. That would have.
They told me I had a
I'd have
math
felt
phobia.
differently about geometry if you were breaking it down like in algebra. If you had broken it down like that. So part of the challenge, right, is what do we do when confronted with the reality of the fact that there's a critical mass of people and organizations and institutions in Memphis who have no desire whatsoever to get to 6. Right? They're like, yeah, Sure, 2, 2, 2, 6, but I don't want 6, right? So keep the 2 here and the point thing here and the point thing here, less than 1, that's fine, right? So that's part of the challenge, right? Is to figure out, again, in history is our guide in terms of how we can figure these things out. We've got options in terms of how we confront these issues. King shows us what those options are. He's like, look, I'm happy to meet with the Chamber of Commerce. I'm happy to meet with the board of whatever. Sure, we can meet on Monday and Tuesday. If we don't get what we need by Friday and Saturday, after church on Sunday, we're trying to shut your city down, right? So, so we've got models for in terms of how we can confront, and how we should respond. King asked this question, 1967, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? So we've got models for how we do this, but one of the things we have to grapple with, right, is the reality of the fact, right? This isn't speculation, it's the reality of the fact that there's a whole bunch of folk in town who have no interest in getting to 6, right? And so we've got to confront that and figure out what our next move is, right? In order to create the circumstances and to create the context in which people who don't want to get to 6 say, oh, hey, you know what? On second thought, maybe I do want to get to 6 because it's going to be really uncomfortable for me staying to point 3, right?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be myself if I didn't throw a curveball. So, and I don't know, Eric, if we're part of a international entity, Urban Land Institute, and we hold annual meetings in our different cities, and we were part of the Memphis chapter, which includes our metro area. And the other night, I didn't have on pearls, but I felt like I needed to clutch them. We have, and I'm going to tell you why.
Oh,
So-
I'm ready for this.
We do these trends, these emerging trends in ULI, and usually you bring in some, no offense to anyone, some white guy, because most of the people in ULI are white men developers, from national, and they bore us locally talking about emerging trends at a national level. Well, we wanted to do something different in Memphis, thanks to our director here, Tanya Meeks, and we wanted to keep it local. We talked about some national trends, but we need to bring it home. And so there was Ashley Cash from House that talks about housing, and someone talks about commercial. And then we got to DEI, since this came up. And our bodies in Memphis and Shelby County look different than they did in 1968. Our mayors, everybody's different. But it just focused on the legislative bodies and contracting. And so this is the curve. And I knew this, but when it stated, it threw me for a loop. 83 cents of every $100 in contracts led to blacks at the county. Cities better, but confusing. It's about 17.7, but it's to WBE and MBE. And Ms. Booker had to school me because I'm like, so what's the difference? So a black woman that goes for a contract at the city, by law, can't be WBE, even if she's clearly identifies as a woman, she's MBE. So that's not a question, it's not on my script, but I want us to talk a little bit about that, because I had to throw you a curveball, because here locally, we're talking about the private sector, but in government, when the bodies look like us, we're still at 83 cents, not $83 of 100, 83 cents of every $100 on the county side, and less than 20% on the city side, but it includes both WBE and MBE. So who's first?
This will be real quick. Not everybody who is invested in segregation is white. Thank you.
You can't really, I don't think we could drop the mic.
These look
In
expensive,
honor.
These
so
are
we
nice.
won't drop
These are
them.
really nice mics.
These are
Don't
really
drop
nice
it.
mics. I was wondering if I could take this home for a souvenir. This is nice. Yeah, so
Ms. Booker, by all means.
So, yes, that is correct, as it relates to MBE and WBE. Those are definitions that are set based on federal guidelines. The WBE classification was created specifically for white, well, in the regulations, it's Caucasian females. And then MBE is any ethnic minority. So it was, the regulation was first created for MBEs after disparity studies and how they would remedy those disparity studies by spending with minority-owned businesses. And then white females were introduced as a disadvantaged group. And so now you have MBEs and WBEs. Well, I really can't speak to the why behind the 83 cents to every $100, but I can speak to government contracting with minority and women-owned businesses. Yeah, I was responsible for MLGW's contracting in general, not just with minorities and women, but with total procurement. And when I started in that space all those years ago, what I learned early on was it's the culture of the organization. And I will say this today, any entity or organization that has a minority and women spending program, and the success of that program is being placed on the shoulders of a supplier diversity officer or an MWBE spend person, you will continue to have 83 cents to $100. The reason the program exists is because of the performance, the behaviors, and the practices of the individuals in procurement and the business units that procurement supports. The supplier diversity and MWBE people have no purchasing authority. None. So the culture of the organization has to be changed. The procurement people have to step forward and do what they're charged with doing. And we have to look at, if we really want inclusion and you want all members of the community and the stakeholders to participate, you have to look at what you're buying, and you look at the requirements that you have. And if you have unrealistic and unnecessary requirements, then that program and that purchasing behavior is designed to keep whoever you're currently purchasing from and continue to purchase from them. So anybody that's looking at specifications for a project and they say you have to have 10 years experience, why? You have to have certain types of certifications. Why? Is this really necessary? Do you have to have completed, in your history, you have to have completed 10 of these projects? 10? And so then you look at the people in the community and say, who's completed 10? Right. Who's not completed 10? Right. Who has 10 years experience? Who doesn't? So it's very simple. Right. It's very simple. It does not take rocket science. But what it takes is those strategic and organizational priorities that I talked about. And so if a board is going to have strategic priorities for minority and women spending, diversity, equity, and inclusion, then the people within the organization that are responsible for those functions should be held accountable, or they need to be moved to some other position that they can perform, because they're clearly not performing in that position. So until we make those kinds of changes and put the right people in the right position, we'll always have what we have, which is, if it's 0.83% or 17.5, or whatever it is.
3%.
Yeah, 83 cents per $100. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'll just follow up with, I was talking about my undergraduate degree is in music business, actually, which was really math heavy. But a song comes to mind about culture. I see the want to in your eyes. You got to have some want to do the things that she's talking about, and that's the culture piece. If there's no culture of wanting to change the issues and the challenges within those industries, you're not going to have it happen. But the accountability piece, and I know that we're going to kind of talk through that, but the accountability piece really lies on it lies in the communities as well. When these businesses come to our communities, we have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to hold you to the standard of what you said before you got here. So we do have that power. So
Yeah,
want to.
Speaking of businesses coming to communities, I mean, always a big elephant in the room is Blue Oval City. How can companies like Blue Oval City or Ford, which the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development expects to bring 27,000 new jobs to the region, best integrate into this community and support the economic growth of its Black community members?
So I'm going to say that it's important to note that the state of Tennessee, the taxes which locally we've paid into, gave $900 million to that company, right? Which is great. But recognize that that $900 million means that you participated in having $900 million be incentivized to that company. So hold them to that standard. And that's what the community should be responsible for, is holding them to the standard. And so that's done through, participating in your political processes and things of that nature. But just knowing that's your money. That is your $900 million that is there. So DEI is the thing that I have to look at on a daily basis. On page 20 of their I forget exactly what it's called, but this is the things we're going to do in this community, or the things we believe in. That's what they say. They say that they're going to hire equitably, hire and make sure that the positions look like the community. And so when those things occur, we have to make sure that we're talking and we're at the table to say, hey, this particular sector doesn't look like this community. And go in and you hold them to the fire. Because again, I don't know if that's your money. When you pay your mortgage, whether you're renting or purchasing, that money is going towards the incentives that come into this community. So that's how we really make a difference and change these things. But I just wanted everybody to know that that's a lot of money out there that's been given out.
Well,
Not given out.
let's stay with Blue Oval City, and we can't not talk about the skills, the education piece, when we talk about Black wealth. And I'm going to ask another question about, the common misconception about us not working hard. Like, we have had to be the hardest working people in this nation.
Of all time.
Much of that time unpaid. And so I want to talk about Blue Oval in those 27,000 jobs. How do we access that? If those are skilled jobs, and I think we had a little conversation about the skills, the education, it's always going to be some challenge for people who have been denied access or barriers are put in their way. How do we get to the outcome we want, where we are participating in those 27,000 jobs in a substantive way, because West Tennessee is so Black?
Well, hey, that plant is basically an advanced manufacturing plant.
It is.
So we know that we'll need STEM educated individuals.
20,000 a year is
Right.
what this community is going to need to produce.
Absolutely. And so we think the plant is going to come online, in 2025?
2025, yes.
So we have some young people that are probably in school, in college, that can look. We need to understand the positions that they will be hiring, what the qualifications are. We have a little time to try to upskill. But we have a large population of people within the inner city that if we don't fully understand the jobs, the requirements, Memphis is going to be left out. You know, there's a huge opportunity for people in this community to know what those jobs are, know how to access those jobs, and to apply for them. But there's another issue. It's 27,000 jobs for that particular plant. But what's going to happen is, if those wages are higher wages, if you have employees today, you need to look at the employees that you have and be prepared and have a plan to retain them, because you could lose them. The best and the brightest are going to be going to Stanton. And so existing businesses today who think it's not going to impact them, it may impact you. It may cause us to pay higher wages to retain people that we want to keep. If they're paying higher wages, it's just going to be market demand. It's going to pay more. So it's more than just the 27,000 jobs that are there, but it's all the existing jobs in the market that's going to be impacted. And it's not going to start when the plant comes offline. It's starting today, because construction is going on. And that's a union site. And union wages are about 3 times more the wages that are currently being paid in the marketplace for those same jobs, which means it's going to drive up the cost to do business here now. So it's not when the plant becomes operational, it's starting today and moving forward. The cost of things are going to go up. And we just need to be prepared for it, because the net effect of that is, if we all participate, and as many people participate as possible, with readiness, with understanding how to tap into what's happening there, then the greater community can benefit. But if we sit back and we don't figure out how to participate, Memphis will be sitting over here as it is today, and everywhere east of Arlington, it's going to be booming.
So one of the things that I think that also means, right, is we have to, now I'm thinking about equations, right?
You're welcome.
Yeah. So one of the things we have to do is is to confront the reality of sort of the educational equation that we've arrived at in Memphis, right? Which is, it's okay for us to have waves and waves and generations of high schoolers, basically black high schoolers, graduating from high school, not prepared to enter into the workforce. We've been okay with that in Memphis. Again, that's part of the equation, right? Talking with an economist friend of mine over in Memphis, he was like, look, the number one thing we need people to do here is to take things out of big boxes and put them into little boxes. And he was like, and quite frankly, you don't need to read on a college level for that, right? So we've been fairly content in the city of Memphis with a middling, I'll be charitable, right? With a middling educational infrastructure, right? That's been okay, because we can meet the labor demands and the labor needs that we have. We need you to throw boxes. So we don't really care whether or not you are college ready, right? So it's the wages of historical sin, right? We're in a state now, we're in a place now where, you know, you've got 20,000 potential high-skilled jobs, and, you know, you've got employers in Memphis who are very scared because of the scarcity, right, of people who can fill those jobs. And you're going to start seeing people leave. And what is that about? It's about, right, the choices that we have made and the choices we continue to make in this city and in this state with regard to, right, the quality of public education. We're perfectly willing, right, to sacrifice again and again and again, right? So that's the other thing that we've got to contend with, and we've got to confront here. When I first got here, I think it was the mayor of Nashville, he was speaking in Memphis, and he was like, we love the fact that y'all haven't gotten your act together yet about education in Memphis. He just laid it out. He's like, we love that, right? Y'all are perfectly content with whatever y'all are doing here, right? You know, this dumpster fire that you got going on here, keep that up, right? Thank you, right? So again, we've got some choices to make in terms of how we want to, if we want to change the future, right? We've got to figure out what that means for us, now, and what our relationship, for instance, to public education is. In 2022, the state of Tennessee decided, hey, you know what? Maybe we should require high school students to learn computer science. Great, thank you, state of Tennessee, because, I hear computers are kind of a thing now. 2022.
Well, I'd like to think that, the upside of it is that because the opportunity is coming, we can now, and you're not wrong about those items. But the upside of it is we are starting to prepare and get ready to get into the workforce and start to put focus and emphasis on hiring or training at least 20,000 STEM graduates a year. That's what it's going to take for us to really be able to be competitive in West Tennessee. These jobs, the wages have been historically low, but the jobs of advanced manufacturing, which is good to know, are around $55,000 annually, right? And so when you think about the number I said earlier, with this being median black household of $41,000 a year, you have an average income of now, or average wage of advanced manufacturing that are coming in that specific space of 55. Now we start to be able to see things shift and change. I think the other opportunity that we have is Memphis is one of those places that has the highest concentration of black tech talent, meaning for every all of the tech related or adjacent jobs, 27% of those are black. And so that means for us that we don't have the sheer volume of it because we're not as big as other cities. But however, we do have a model that if you continue to pour more advanced jobs in it, we can scale up. And those industry jobs, wages are roughly about $97,000 a year. So we have the makings to be able to do it. We have the talent that wants to be here. I think that the kids want to learn. They want to know. But we've got to position them in a space to take advantage of these opportunities because there is immense opportunity that is coming with the shifting of the economy. Again, IT or internet-related, not internet, but tech-related jobs average about $97,000 to $100,000. So we can really take an opportunity. And the last thing I'll say is if you've got a kid in your life, mechatronics, that's what's coming. Mechatronics is a mix of engineering and a lot of different things, but mechatronics is what we're going to see a lot of in chips manufacturing, which there's billions of dollars being placed there. Hopefully, we'll be one of those cities that can attract some of that, and then we'll grow from those spaces.
Yeah, so we only have a few minutes left, and so I'm going to limit you all to about 45 seconds, and this is going to be hard. What is possible for building black wealth today and in the future? And I have to throw in, I'm not answering questions, but I'll say the removal of exclusionary zoning ordinances. I had to throw that in. I'm a developer. Dr. McKinney.
The question is, what are we prepared to fight for?
Basically, what is possible for building black wealth?
Yeah,
in the
what are we
future?
prepared
Yeah.
to fight for to make the building of black wealth more possible for more people beyond the middle class?
Oh, that's the answer, yeah. What are we willing to fight for? Ms. Booker?
That's a good answer. It is. I mean, and you think
thanks.
and think about it. So I mean, I think about in this space, where I work, is to continue to equip, identify resources, make connections for business owners, to help them see the things that are possible through demonstrations of businesses that have already done what they need to do or can do. But I think that there's ways for us to show businesses what are possible, continue to identify and be able to provide access to more resources and opportunities.
Eric?
Can you ask the question again?
What is possible for building black wealth today and in the future?
Everything is possible. It's a matter of how far do we see ourselves going? We are in a space where our challenges of the past, everybody is aware of it. So just because they're aware of it doesn't mean they're going to act on it, but they're aware of it. So now we have the opportunity, and because we made spaces for other folks, we have the opportunity to really move the needle and really shift again. And financial and economic stability and knowledge is really where we change and grow. And I know you said 45 seconds. But what I will say is economics give us an opportunity to do what in chess is called the queening of the pawn. It's where the pawn becomes the most powerful position on the board. And I think that with specifically what's coming to this area, if we dig in, and I'm an optimist, believe it or not, my sister would tell you that I'm not, but with what's coming, we have the opportunity to shift and grow and position our youth and position other folks to really take advantage of these higher wage opportunities, to take advantage of the structures that are existing for us to grow internet or I keep saying internet, technology-based jobs, So we really have that opportunity to become the powerful piece on the board, the queen on the board, if we really shift and move and wrap and move together. So.
Thank you. So now we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. And
Good evening. I wanted to ask about the fallacy that we're talking about here, because if we're talking about building black wealth and we're not talking about reparations, I wonder if there's any reality in it. A number of the panelists have referred to the generational impact of what we are experiencing, but people really seem to be reluctant to talk about reparations, and I don't know how you repair or how you overcome multiple generations of, being put in a place where you can't participate. And then to say, as the sister said, you have to have 10 years experience when you haven't even been allowed in the industry for that time. Or when you look at the educational system and you're talking about multiple generations of education that has been subpar. So if we don't deal with that reality, are we really just talking about building black wealth for the talented 10th? Or are we talking about the larger population of not just Memphis, but, these are things that in housing, with respect to the freeways, these are things that have happened around the country. So you experience the same exact thing in Atlanta, in Little Rock, in Chicago, in New York.
Durham.
Yeah, and in places like Florida where you rename yourself, you're no longer a slave state, you're Disney World. So the strategies have been that intense, but we come with very mediocre kinds of strategies saying we want to build black wealth when we have these kinds of obstacles in front of us, and I'm wondering if we're going to deal with those realities.
can I answer as the moderator? And so I think most people, when they think about reparations, they think about direct payments. And so I think about it a little different. It's the undoing of. And so I mentioned exclusionary zoning practices. And in my data in the beginning, I talked about the stripping of the equity from blacks. And Dr. McKinney even talked further back in history how land was taken due to racial terror. And so if blacks, the concentration of our wealth is in property and pension, and we know the pensions are gone for the most part, unless you were older and you got in. I actually got into a GM pension, but that's a whole nother story. I got like $2 in it. So let's just deal with property. And so if we don't undo exclusionary zoning policies, which we're making some attempts locally, and both bodies have now done the 3 readings, and they wanted to talk about reparations, and I'm delayed the zoning policies. You just talked about our reparations by delaying them, because we have to undo that if that's where our wealth lies in property. And our county and city depend almost solely on property tax revenue. So what happens in black neighborhoods when zoning is a certain way? We're impacted most by environmental issues. And we can just go to Southwest Memphis. People talked about the pipeline, but there is the Valero plant there. There is the ETO issue on Florida Street. There are all kind of issues in the area. And if you look at that part of Memphis, MLK Riverside Park, which is the first park for black people, is cut off by the interstate. It's surrounded by industry. What happens to property values? Plummet. And my friends at the National Fair Housing Alliance, they're coming to town, but they told me something, again, pearl clutching. In Memphis, white family, black family, real story. They look the same on paper outside of their race. The difference in the equity in their homes, $166,000. That is today. And so reparations to me looks like undoing policies that were racist, clearly racist, around land, since this country was built around land. It was who could vote, white men who owned land. And so we keep forgetting history. I'm sorry to jump over there into history. We keep forgetting that. So what you're seeing in moves in development or the built environment across the country is undoing the interstate. So if you look in the neighborhoods that are not Overton Park, they had already started to buy the land. And so they built these walls in Smoky City and along the Jackson Avenue corridor. You look in the medical district, they're walls to nowhere because they were already planning for the ramps because they could go after black land where black people live easier. And then they couldn't do so much in the Garden District of Overton Park because it was wealthy. It was the city's wealthy. And they fought it for 50 years. And so now we have these ramps. Why are they still there? After decades, they don't go anywhere. Take them down. Restore those spaces for people that lived there before. Join those neighborhoods back together. And so reparations for me is changing policy. And specifically, because I'm so into the built environment, it's the zoning policy. And that doesn't mean we can't have guaranteed income and some other stuff happening at the same time. Because when we change the way our built environment is, we bring retail back because they chase rooftops. And I tell ladies in the neighborhood, they'll say, older ladies in the neighborhood, they want a grocery store. And I say, let's talk about models. And so I talk about, and I say, what does a Walgreens look like? They all describe a Walgreens. They're at a corner, they're busy streets, they are brick buildings, they look the same. I said they got a model. And so my dream around reparations is that we build our communities, every one of them, as Lifetime Fitness communities. And let me tell you what I mean by that. If you go to any city in the United States, the Lifetime Fitness places, they look the same demographically. They're 250,000 at least in household income, 2.5 kids. They're like perfect. They're like the Truman Show or something. And they're wealthier. They have schools. They have all of the amenities. Lifetime they fit the model. And so our model is Collierville. And they built a town and it fit their Lifetime model. So why doesn't that happen in North Memphis, South Memphis, Frazier? And so that means we got a lot of work to do at the legislative bodies, and we tend to blame the executive, a mayor or a governor. No, I want the bodies at the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level, the Congress, to change the things that they put in place decades ago to keep us in poverty, to keep us enslaved, and to deny us our reparations. And I wasn't supposed to be answering because I'm the moderator, but that got me kind of fired up.
Sometimes, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. And sometimes the answer is to cut a check.
Yep.
50 years worth of Tennessee State being shortchanged. Y'all see this article a couple of years ago? Right? The state of Tennessee has 2 land grant institutions, the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University. Back during the good old days of segregation, separate but what?
Equal.
Separate but what?
Unequal.
Equal, separate but equal. So the yearly disbursements for Tennessee State and the University of Tennessee were supposed to be equal. Surprise, surprise, state of Tennessee shorted Tennessee State over the course of 5 to 6 decades. Somebody ran the numbers a couple of years ago. The state of Tennessee owes Tennessee State $550 million. They're having conversations about dilapidated buildings. They're having conversations about leadership over at Tennessee State. Well, you all aren't doing the blah, 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 blah. If you gave me my $550 million, it would look a little different over here, right? So there are a number of models with regard to reparations. One of the things I really appreciate about the reparations conversation is that we bump into sort of incontrovertible fact with regard to land theft, with regard to, right, the under-resourcing of black institutions. That's just Tennessee State. Let's go to every southern state that's got a public HBCU and look over the books. This is all public information. I'm going to step out on a limb and say this is probably not the only historically black college that's been shorted by a southern state, right? The state of Tennessee owes Tennessee State $550 million. So the question becomes, what are we going to do about that? Right? So the question of reparations, this is not about, right, so it can be about a couple of things. It can be about the wages that Jake McKinney did not get access to. But Sandy Darity, a brilliant economist who's authored the book on reparations, he was like, it can be about that. It can also be about the age of segregation. Because we know what sorts of wages got paid out, right? It can be about that too. Remember the theft that I was talking about earlier? It can be about that too. You're a homeowner in the state of Alabama for 40 years and you paid property taxes for institutions that you did not have access to? And tell me again why you shouldn't get a check from the state of Alabama, right? So in this moment, we're having a number of conversations about the possibilities of reparation and what reparation can look like. So I am heartened by the multiple iterations, and Rashawn, you make a really good point here, the multiple iterations, right, and the multiple possibilities, right, around what reparations could look like. But for the state of Tennessee, somebody needs to cut a check to Tennessee
Show me
State
the money.
University.
Yeah.
I think we have time unfortunately, for one more question, but we'll be around after.
Good evening. I appreciate each and every one of you, and everything that each and every one of you have said has definitely been facts and even more. I looked around the room even when I walked in, and I thought, how many people are awake or as awake as I have at age 70? At age 14, I was one of the youngest people in a small group in Mississippi who sat at the footsteps of Fannie Lou Hamer, Owen Brooks, Unita Blackwell, and I can keep naming and naming. And as a retired educator, I looked at that theme, and we're trained to always give the positive before the negative. Well, I'm going to just kind of switch it up a little bit. Building black wealth, will we ever get there? I don't think it will be in my lifetime. However, we have about 20% of African Americans who are breaking the ceiling. They're breaking the ceiling with their own businesses. They're sustainable businesses. But they didn't get them through going into a bank. They got them from saving their monies or money or monies or talking to or connecting with people in their neighborhoods, their families, and what have you. And I often think about one of my great uncles who passed for white in Yazoo City, Mississippi, owned an oil well. My father built his wealth from real estate and was known back then as one of the wealthiest African Americans in the Delta. I think about something that Dr. King said. He said, when you talk about black wealth, you got to remember there are three evils: capitalism, racism, and poverty. So I don't know how we can bridge that gap. Matter of fact, we probably won't ever bridge that gap because it's always a reverse psychology game that is used on us by design. So I just wanted to state that, and again, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
Foremost, I'd like to thank our moderator, and our panelists for providing their insight and expertise this evening. I think what you heard tonight was expertise, passion and conviction, and truth-telling. All of those things are necessary ingredients when you're talking about trying to go about the business of system change. Part of what we talked about tonight was policy and system change, and really appreciate the insights that were provided. Also, please join me in thanking our sponsor, Wells Fargo. It's been a pleasure to be with you all this evening. Before you leave, we'd ask you to complete this survey that's found on the screen. And we appreciate all you do for the National Civil Rights Museum, and thank you for supporting us in multiple ways. Thank you.